What's up, everybody? It's Marcus with Metaphos, bringing you a tier list video for the Edison 2024 National Season. This is just going to be my opinion on, what decks to prepare for, what I think are going to be the best suited decks to take down the event, as well as maybe some sleeper decks, and just where I see all of them ranking amongst each other. And without further ado, let's get started. Alrighty, and first one we got here is Amarillis. Amarillis is really good. I really like its frog matchup. I think it's one of the few decks that is like 50-50 with frogs, and/or some hands are just so good versus frogs. Like if you can get a Dandy to Grave, drop a Titanial, it can get unfair really fast because they basically have to see Miracle Fusion or like a Torrential. They're really good into a lot of rogue matchups. I think it has a very favorable value matchup. The thing that keeps it from being S tier is I think the Blackwing matchup is kind of atrocious. Winnable, but it's just tough. So I think I'm going to drop it here in tier 1. It's been doing really well as of late, and I do think it's going to have a good representation at Nationals as a result. Would expect to see maybe one make top 8, but who knows? We'll see. Next on the tier list here is pure Blackwings. I mean, it's one of the big 3, no doubt. It's S tier. I'm somewhere between it being the first or second best deck. It's just so strong. There's so many power cards: Whirlwind, Dad, Brain Con. If you see any of those with the natural aggression the deck has and its consistency, I would not be surprised to see this deck take down the whole event. But if not, I expect to see 1 to 2, possibly even up to 3 in top 8. Next up, we've got Chainburn, and this is a deck that you have to know how to play against to really capitalize against it, but the better players do, and as a result, this deck struggles to make it deep runs in tournaments because it really just eats on bad players and just not knowing the interactions. I think I'm going to drop it down here, tier 2, because it's definitely playable, definitely a scary deck, and one, if you run into it, you gotta be on your A game, and you can easily lose to. But I can't justify pushing it up above here, not at least until someone does something with it. The Dark Calling deck. This deck, when it came out, was really scary, and I like the amount of pressure it could drop. But unfortunately, it just doesn't really have the results nor the player base pushing it. If it was optimized, I can see it in 1.5, maybe even all the way up to 1, but I think this is also just another tier 2 deck. Next up, we got Diva Hero Beat. The fall of Diva Hero Beat this year has been quite absurd. I will say, for Nationals specifically, I think this is really, really well positioned. I think that any of the Hero Beat strategies are pretty well positioned because they just got a really strong Blackwing matchup, which I think is going to be there. The Diva Hero Beat matchup is it's close to 50-50 with frogs. I really just dislike the value matchup. Actually, I think I'm talking myself a little bit out of it. I'm going to drop it here to 1.5, though I do think there is a Hero Beat deck that I can explain a little bit differently when we get to it. Next is Diva Hero. This is just one of those decks where there's a couple of good pilots who used to push this deck all the way up to 1 and close to S, but as of late, it just hasn't had those results. The current landscape of the format makes me really also not as much of a fan of this deck. A couple of my friends are huge believers in it. I think I like it more than Diva Hero Beat, though. I'm going to put in 1.5. I'm going to put it ahead of the Diva Hero Beat deck. Next is the Dragon Control, or Flip Dragons, whatever you call it. In my opinion, this is another tier 1.5 deck. I mean, it plays a lot of good cards. If you opt to play a deck like this, I think I'd rather just play the value deck. I think I'm just going to drop it right there. Dragon Turbo. So this is one, I know the majority of people see it as the 1 to 1.5. But what I believe is, for Nationals specifically, a lot of the good Dragon players who make deep runs and tournament wins online will be there, and as a result, I'm actually pushing this all the way up to S tier. It's got a great frog matchup, in my opinion. I think you know, it's slightly favored against Vayu. Its only bad matchup at the top of the tier list is Blackwings. But a lot of times, you know, if you draw the casino hands, they won't even stand a chance, so it won't matter. You just have a couple less turns to get there normally against those decks. And another surprising pick, we got Chaos Fairies, and I know a lot of people put it down here in like 1.5 range. But if you're specifically playing the pudding list, which I've been testing a ton lately, it plays like the September 2012 format Chaos Dragon deck with just a lot of hand extenders. You just basically use the Dimensional Alchemist as a card. You have so many cards that float to it to turbo Christia, because you're milling cards, and if it's not Christia, it's still extenders like Chaos Orc, or, you know, just power cards. You can add back Gores from the Banish Zone. I think this deck is super well positioned if you're playing that board. Or that build, because it's got a good Blackwing matchup, especially post-side. I think it's favorable versus Frogs, actually. And I also think against Vayu, it is the best Fairy deck suited against Vayu, because traditionally Fairies don't like that matchup all that much. I personally think it's right here. I have it ahead of Amarillis. But not by much, but I also think this is a very hard deck to pilot. Same with Dragon Turbo, but we're going to Nationals, right? So the quality of player should be much higher. I really do think this is well positioned to make a run. And then in the same breath, we got Pure Fairies, which I drop all the way down here to tier 2. It's too normal summon reliant. So, like, it's doing similar things to this deck, but this deck is able to play Chaos Orc, Soul Impurity. You're turboing to your grave, so Christia becomes an easier extender. There's just a lot more going for it. You have Enrise, whereas this is like Christia and a bunch of normal summons, and you know, a good player is not going to let you like crash your floater 4 times and drop Christia. You also have to kind of hard draw Christia more often. I'm just way less of a fan of the Pure Fairy build. Fish OTK. Honestly, I don't think this deck's very good. I think it had the surprise factor when ran by a very good pilot. I guess I do fear it more than I do a deck like Chainburn, so I will drop it down here to tier 2. But I think there's also just kind of a better version of this deck, which is the Frog combo deck. I know it's showing the wrong card on the side here. Just imagine that it's showing like a Fishborg Blaster or a Desfrog, because the Fishborg Frog deck is absurd. I think that deck is far from being optimized. It might be getting close, and it's really hard to play. Honestly, it would be an S tier deck if Deck Dev, Oppression, and Crow weren't so relevant in main and side decks. I honestly think it's a tier 1 deck also, and I don't know how many people will play it, so I couldn't tell you if I could predict any amount of top spots. But I do think it's a tier 1 deck. And once optimized, I would not be surprised if this deck ends up making some deep tournament runs and some wins at some point in the future. And then for the Frog Monarch deck, much worse, just because it's a slower tempo deck, but it's still not bad. It's better than all these decks. I think I'm going to put in 1.5. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to opt to play a deck that's relying to summon like Monarchs and use your normal summons more in that fashion, I would rather just play the Hero Frog deck, which, no surprise, up here in the big 3. I think I have it currently as my number 1 deck. I have it really close between these two. Yeah, I expect to see 2 or 3. Would not be surprised if it wins another one. All the best Frog players, as far as I know, are going to be at Nationals. So yeah, and it's very, very likely I end up taking this deck as well. It's probably my most played deck. I also just think it is so resilient across the board. Even your losing matchups are like barely under like that 50-50 mark, and then it's got so many 55 and 60-40 matchups that, yeah, it's clearly an S tier. The Gemini deck, man, I think this deck's trash. I know some people were hyping it up, putting it tier 2, tier 1.5. I definitely think it's worse than all these decks. And there might be a world it's like on this tier, but for Nationals, I'm dropping this to 3. I don't really like it into any of the matchups I have in S or the first tier really all that much. Yeah, dropping that to 3. I'm not going to explain too much there. Gladiator Beast. This deck's been on a rise. It's got a decent Frog matchup. It's got a decent Blackwing matchup. Honestly, I just think it's kind of well positioned, even though the deck's just okay. The question is it's got to be a 1.5. I like it more than I like the Frog Monarchs. I like it more than Dragon Control. I like it slightly more than Diva Hero Beat. We're going to go ahead and put it right here behind Diva Hero. But yeah, I mean, I do not be surprised. I think it might be the third or fourth, no, not third, probably fourth most represented deck at Nationals, so be prepared for it. It's going to be very prevalent. People love their Glad Beast. But I will also say I just don't see it in the same tier as the S tier decks. It might be tier 1 worthy. It's just a very much... It's hard just because what it's wanting to do. I just feel like decks like Blackwings does better. So, and this is the deck. This is the hero version that I said I would be pushing up to tier 1 because I think the matchups heroes struggle against a little bit more, like slightly Frogs, and then Vayu. Skill drain is just crazy versus both of those decks. And yeah, I just think this build is really well positioned going into Nationals because outside of those decks, like there's skill drain almost solves all your bad matchups. And outside of those decks, it's got pretty well matchup spread across the board. Like it's really good versus Blackwings, obviously, as well, like I was saying. So I'm pushing that tier 1. Honestly, just because I think this has a strong... No, I'm not going to push it any further. I was going to say I might push it up the board, but once again, I don't think there's going to be a ton of hero beat stun players. Gladiator. I think this might lead the tier 1.5s. I like it a little bit more than I like the Diva Hero deck. But to be honest, I think the Pudding Fairy deck kind of is a Gladiator deck that just abandons playing the one of Lightsworns and some of the brickier cards that are lower card quality. And just cuts JD and instead says, you know, I might lose 2 really strong boss monsters, but I'm replacing them with Enrise and Chaos Orcs, and instead of Celestias, I'm playing Caiuses, and you know, those cards are also just really strong. Their summoning requirements a little bit easier than JD in a lot of situations, so yeah, I'm dropping a 1.5, but this deck is definitely scary, and I really like that it's got a really strong Frog matchup and Dragon matchup. I've played this deck a lot because I really used to believe in Gladiator. There's just a lot of hands that take a little bit too long to get going. And that's where I think the deck really struggles, is like, if it gets going, it's an S tier deck. It's just getting there. And then next is Pure Lightsworn. I know this had a lot of hype lately too. I'm definitely just still more scared of Gladiator. This deck is more consistent, I'll give it that. But the trade-off is just lower card quality. Yeah, I think I'm going to drop it back here above the Dragon Control decks. It might be better than Diva Hero B. It's like the same. But I'm not going to talk about that too much. Then there's Machina Control. This deck has kind of had a resurgence, especially because the Machina cards are just really good. They're definitely ahead of their time. I think there is going to be a Machina deck that tops this event. I also do think that Machina is... just, I don't know how to explain it. I just think it's way ahead of its time. Like, the card's really good against all the S tier decks. If you drop it, it's a problem for basically every deck in the format. And as long as you're playing correctly into cards like Deep Prison Bottomless, I think it's really good. I think it's better than Hero Beat. I think it's more likely to top than this. Yeah, I'm going to push it ahead of Amarillis. I just think it's got a strong matchup spread. Like it a lot. 50-50 with Vayu, probably. I think it's got a good Blackwing matchup. I think Frogs are a little bit favored into Machina Control, but definitely in the same way Frogs are favored to Vayu. But I definitely think, like, if this deck gets rolling, it's anyone's game. So yeah, I'm going to drop it there. Whereas Machina Gadgets, I think, is much worse. You play too many monsters that just don't do a whole lot, and if you're not getting to your fortresses, your card quality is a lot lower. Traps just aren't as good into the S tier decks, and this deck is very about 1-for-1 trades and stuff like that, and it's just harder to get off against decks like Frogs and honestly even Vayu. So dropping it down. Yeah, I'm put it here, but yeah, I don't know. Whereas I think this is a tier 1 deck. This is slowly being more popular. Specifically the Quickdraw Machina deck. It's been doing a lot better as of late. I do think that this deck has, you know, some struggles still, like into Blackwings, but playing the Machina engine really, really helps that matchup. I think it's got a strong value matchup. I think it's got a way more solid frog matchup because you don't have to dedicate to your board, and you know, you're in a lot of ways you can like drop drill, and that's always really awkward for the frog decks to play into. It's got a little bit more aggression than Dragon Turbo. I just think it's like an optimized version of the Quickdraw plant deck. Yes, you lose out on Titanial, but all the things that you gain just kind of outweigh that in my opinion. Though, I will say, I still think the Quickdraw plant deck is good, so I am going to drop it here into tier... yeah... so I like it more than Dragon Control? I think I do. Yeah, I would put it here, so right underneath it. It is a tier lower. It's got Titanial going for it, but outside of that, you just have less quality starters. Adding 3 really good starters to the deck, especially when your deck already plays some machines like Card Trooper and Quickdraw. I just think the Machina version is a little bit better. Rescue Cat, this card's busted, however, the deck just is not. It's kind of like Fish OTK, where it's got to see its combo play. It sees it a little bit more frequently, I guess. But the payoff isn't nearly as strong as Fish OTK is, unless you're like going into 0 traps and summoning double Arabellum. I'll put it right here. I'm not really scared to play the Rescue Cat decks. Like, yeah, you can get cheesed, yeah, it can blow up, but it's just not consistent enough, and you have to play a lot of bad cards to like justify playing a cat deck. 6 Sams, unfortunately, I love this deck. It's too slow. Only real extenders, Grandmaster, and like some trap cards. Yeah, I don't think it's very good. I'm gonna drop it tier 3. Obviously, you have Gateway, which is busted if it's sitting on the field for 2 or 3 turns, but like it's not nearly as busted as like a Black Whirlwind thing. So putting it there. Next is Twilightsworn. I do like this more than Pure Lightsworn, but I like it slightly less than Gladiator. It's kind of like in this range, I think, of these 3 decks. I mean, you can place it anywhere you want there. I'm going to drop it here. It's really powerful. You play a lot of power cards. It's less resilient when you go for game because, you know, you still can get cores and tragged and stuff like that. But I do like it. It feels like it flows a little bit better than the Gladiator deck. But once again, if I'm going to play a deck where I care about the flow and I want to play those Chaos kind of cards, I'm playing this Chaos Fairy deck. So another card in the S tier is going to be Val Turbo. I have it here as the 3rd best deck going into Nats, just because I think frogs are a lot more prevalent than they used to be. And I think specifically frogs have a really strong matchup, at least from my personal experience, as well. Just like theory-wise, if you really think about it, you have the Monarchs to their turn 1 sets. You have Soul Exchange in your deck. When they do, if you ever stick a Ab-Zero, they always have to make a play where they're losing card advantage to clear it. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that it's 3rd best deck. It's pretty close to 50-50 with Blackwing. I think it might be slightly favored there. But I just don't like the frog matchup, and I think frogs are just going to be really prevalent here at Nats. I do think Vaya will be the most represented deck, so expect 2, maybe 3 top cut spots. Honestly, it's got the most wins. You know, a lot of people probably have it like this or like this. But yeah, just for Nats format specifically, I think I'm going to put it here. And then we got X-Sabers, and this is my favorite deck of all time. It just doesn't have the cards it needs in this format to be like a top 10 deck. And as a result, it's somewhere in this 2 to 3 range. You know, if I'm going to let my bias win a little bit here, I'm going to drop it here in tier 2. It's probably in tier, like a tier 2.5, because I do like it better than like 6 Sams. And maybe I'm not being fair to Gemini, but yeah, X-Saber's, like, when it goes off, it's kind of got the same issues like the Cat deck, the Fish OTK deck. But yeah, you just don't have the quality of X-Sabers that you have later on. And there's just a lot of hands that are just way too slow. Next, we got the Zombie Hero deck. So, like, I'm thinking the Jake XO deck. And I think this deck's crazy. And that guy is really good. I don't know if there will be enough pilots to, like, warrant it getting a top spot or two. He might be able to do it. Maybe there's a few others out there that'll run it. But I do think it's a tier 1 deck. You know what? I think I definitely like it a little bit more than Machina Quickdraw. And I like it more than the Hero Stun. I think I'm gonna drop it here. I think if any top, it'll just be 1, and it's just really good. It puts a lot of pressure, and the card quality of that deck's really high. You're playing just a lot of good cards put together in a deck, and if built optimally, if it flows, it's not gonna always flow well, but if it flows well enough, I can definitely see this deck making a run. It's got extremely crazy plays and a very high ceiling. It's a little bit better in the Diva Hero deck in the sense that, like, after your initial push, a lot of times there's still a little bit more resilience. So yeah, I'll drop it there. And for the last deck on the tier list is the Instant Fusion Zombie deck. I think this deck is just, I mean, it's got a really high ceiling. It can come out of nowhere and kill anyone, but it's kind of similar in, like, the sense that, like, you're just dropping all your cards out of your hand for one initial push to try to win the game. It's very combo oriented in that aspect. But if I'm going to play an all-in combo deck like that, I'd rather play like the Zombie or Frog or Dragon Turbo decks. I think this tier, honestly, it's fallen really hard. I think it's unfair to place it in tier 2 because it's definitely better than all those decks. I would have put it at the head. I like it maybe better than the Frog Monarch deck. No, you know, I actually see it kind of right here next to the Lightsworn deck. I think that's a fair placement. And ultimately, that is what I think the tier list will look like for National Season. Personally, I will probably end up playing Frog Hero. If I don't, it will probably still be one of these S tier decks, and if not one of those, definitely this Pudding deck. I've been testing it a lot. I think it is crazy good. That Chaos Fairy deck is very, very good. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you have any questions, shoot them down in the comments below. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And excited to see everyone at Nationals. I'm out.